Hello and welcome to Beacon Bits. I'm Serge Boudreau, joined by Yves Boudreau. And again, we're not related, but I'm way better looking. And this is a podcast where we talk about the world of work and what's good and what's not. Yves, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, I think we have to talk about something that is work related. And what we wanted to talk about this week was pay transparency. And pay transparency has been a hot topic, I would say, for the last 5 years, but it's taken a lot of traction in the last couple of years. So let's talk about it in the perspective of Canada for now. And obviously a lot of it is relatable for the rest of the world. But I want to give you a couple of key stats. So right now in Canada, there is 6 jurisdiction or province that it is legislation. So those 6 provinces are BC, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island. And what's interesting for us being in Atlantic Canada, 3 of the 4 Atlantic provinces do have pay transparency legislation. Are you surprised that New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada, basically is really taking the leap, with the exception of New Brunswick?
I don't know if surprise is the word. Like I think it took one province to be the first one to kind of get the ball rolling, which was I believe PEI. And then Ontario followed suit. I think BC came next. I think it's just like it's a pace of different provinces have different set of resources available to implement these types of measures. And I think it's just a coincidence that it is 3 out of 4. New Brunswick might be just lagging a bit, but it's obvious that the rest of the province are going to follow suit. So yeah, and I believe 70% of the world in general is moving towards pay transparency.
If we look at the US, the first state was Colorado, and it caused a lot of issues because it happened right during the pandemic, and it happened during the time of remote work. So a lot of companies that were posting jobs for remote work started excluding Colorado in where they posted the jobs because they had to put the pay transparency on it way before all the other states. Obviously, now it's completely different. California, New York, basically it's around 80% of the population in the US has some type of pay transparency. And I think we're going to see that in Canada. I guess the question is, why move to pay transparency? And the first thing that anyone talks about is the pay gap between men and women. And obviously, if salaries are not shared, it does put a huge disadvantage for some folks, right? And if we look at how people are feeling about it, and job seekers specifically, they're on board. 80% of people say it's a great idea. Right now in Canada, around 49% of postings on major job boards have some type of pay transparency. If we compare this to 2019, it was 22%. We're seeing huge difference in pay range. And I think there were some stories in the US. It was funny. And I think it was Netflix actually that put the job starts at 80K to 700K, which is it's not helpful, right? And I think a lot of companies being forced to are just trying to get around it. So there is a lot of reluctance from employers. And for a lot of people to be like, why would employers even care? Like, what's your take on this? Why are employers pushing back?
Salary's always been a little bit of a privacy kind of like thing, right? Like if you think about our parents and grandparents, like they would never talk. I never knew how much my dad made or my mom, made.
No, you never asked?
Oh, I asked, they would never tell.
No?
If you think about a lot of the leadership and management in these organizations, they are, our age group, our parents or and that's kind of fundamentally not been a thing. They don't feel like they're ready, like they're not structured for it. There's concern, especially with existing employees around. There's been those stories as well of jobs being posted, and then someone who has the same role or the same title within an organization is not even in that pay band being advertised, which creates other challenges. And so there's definitely some fear around that aspect of it. I don't think there's like a malicious intent to not wanting to do it. I just don't think they're structured and don't feel comfortable putting something out. And it's a big change.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about 100 plus year of not being a requirement, and now it's being imposed. But I think employers should do it. But I also don't think the general population, as well as just people on the outside looking in should expect that it's an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. And I'll give you an example. And during the pandemic, I worked for a company that hired a lot of software devs. And the challenge that we had is the salaries increased dramatically because there was so much competition. So say we had software devs at 130, and based on the market, you weren't able even to talk to a software dev for under 200 during that time.
Yeah.
So what do you do? And then, like, anyone would say, well, increase the salaries of everyone that is working there. But if you put that in perspective, you say have 400 and you're increasing the salary of 70, 80K for all of them, you're talking about 10 to 15 million that would actually put that company bankrupt. There's no way they could meet payroll if they brought everyone to the same level. So the challenge is you're bringing in new people at a higher level because you don't have a choice. You have to bring them in to be able to sustain the business that you're driving. So and I get it internally. If you're working there, they'd be like, hey, you need to bring me to that same level. I get it. I get it for an employee. So that causes a major challenge because you have no time. This is where I think the intentions of the company was definitely to bring everyone to the same level. But if you bring them up in one shot and take a $10 million hit, yeah, it can definitely cause a lot of concerns internally to be able to run that business. People don't always understand why someone makes more money than they do. So I might be at a level and someone is at a similar level, but what they're bringing to the table as a company might be dramatically more. So is it fair for that person, because there's a salary band and disclosure, that they're the same level as someone that's not bringing the same value to the organizations? I don't think so. It's not that simple.
No, it's not that simple, but that's part of what makes the whole situation not as black and white. And we talked about this industry in the past, like not the absolute statements on anything is really difficult. You just mentioned the word pay band. Like that on its own, like most organizations don't actually have pay band systems. And so now you have to come up with a pay band system that, it factors in that someone 2, 3, 4, 5 people could have the same job title, but then they're not at the same level of experience within those roles. So you have to have the job title level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and then there's a pay band for each of those. And you have to be very, intentional about how you can't just give anyone any titles anymore within these kind of systems, because they're tied to a certain compensation level. I met a company this week that has roughly 250 employees, and they've been investing a lot of time. They want to do pay transparency. They do think it's the right thing to do, but it's an organization that's been around for a really long time. They have a full-on dedicated resource like department with multiple people working through this. They've been spending months figuring out what the right policies are for the organization, but then they're like in between, right? They have to evaluate every single person on the organization. Where do they fit in? What's their actual, like, what title are they at, but what level are they at within that range? And they also need to convince ownership and management to be able to do those things. So, and this is an organization that makes millions of dollars every year. That's not the case for a lot of companies. How are these smaller businesses going to implement these without potentially putting their existing culture at risk?
Yeah, I agree. In a lot of large organizations, you have workforce planning, you have a compensation team that works this through. As a small business, there's no way, like most small business don't even have HR or don't even have those resources, wouldn't even know where to start. So to be able to execute this properly, you have to hire an outside consultancy that's going to cost you a lot of money, a lot of challenges. And also, like, what are the restrictions on the growth of the company? Because there's a lot of times that you're going to have to bring in, especially for a small business, and people that are at a higher level, and your competitive advantage is you're willing to pay more because you might not have the brand, you might not have the reputation yet. There's obviously so many things that you're competing against for that skill set. Your one lever that you might be able to leverage is the salary. And if you're keeping everyone in a salary band, even if this person is qualified at a much higher level, you might not be able to get them because you can't compete on the salary now, or you can't be aggressive on the salary side because you want to make sure that everyone is equitable across the board. I'm still a big believer that I believe in pay transparency. I think I told you.
You're getting in front of people that are still like interested in talking to your organization based on what you're willing to offer, based on and you know the whole I don't want to put it out because then I'm going to miss out on good candidates because the pay bands are going to be too low, or they're going to go straight for the top of the salary range that we display, like, and we're not actually willing to pay that at that level. But I don't think that's really like something to be concerned about.
Well, is it? Because the other side is anytime that you pay a range and you put it on, so say you put 80 to 120, the candidate automatically jumps at 120. And I think the intentions of doing that is like, if you are at the high end of the skill set and match pretty much every requirement, yeah, you might be at it. But for that, say, junior or middle candidate, they're automatically going to the 120 as well. So it does cause some challenges in the conversations, right? Especially in the negotiation as well.
It does, but the conversation not go to showing them a path to get to the higher end of that. Like, I don't care what skills you have on paper. I want to see how you're going to fit in the organization. I want to see what you're going to be contributing to how are you going to show up every day. So it's like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to pay you that $120,000, but let's start at 100, somewhere in the middle, and then let's work towards maybe we bake in the increase right away, right? You're like, hey, your contract is going to have a built-in raise in 6 months, but we want to see like how like this is a relationship, right? So it's like we want to see how it's all going to play out. There's almost no one, like, unless it's like, I don't know, Johnny Ives from Apple who wants to come and, be our lead designer on future products, then probably pay him whatever he wants. But like, there's very few people that, to me, like that I would just go and say, I'm going to pay you whatever you want unless they really have an amazing track record. And even then I would still want to see whether this person is going to fit is it going to work? Within the company. So I think if you provide a comprehensive plan of how like you see them, being at that $120,000 price point or whatever the high end number is, but you still want to see, like, there are things that you want to see within this kind of onboarding phase or this initial phase to see if it's going to work out, and then get them to. That would be my approach to it, but every organization can obviously approach it from a different angle.
Well, I think for large organizations, it's a little bit easier because there's clear definition of what the competencies are to get to that level. I don't think any hiring manager doesn't like paying people at the top level if they're worth the top level. I think that's where it's a lot easier for large organizations to be able to determine because they have the resources. For smaller and mid-sized organizations, that's really challenging because there's not a lot of workforce planning or compensation internally. But in saying all of that, Yves, if we look at it, it's being adopted. It's being adopted by a lot of companies. 49% is high. And obviously a lot of it was driven by initially Indeed enforcing all the job ads, right? Yep. We never did that at Career Beacon, and Indeed backed down because they got a lot of pressure to back down from large organizations that were just not ready to be able to execute for everything we talked about. But it is being adopted, and we're seeing that number raise pretty dramatically. So there's a lot of great things about it. And research shows when you do it and there's pay transparency, there is actually more engagement with your employees. It shares that your organization is looking at equal opportunity. Now, for someone to look up, being like, why are all the dudes making $20,000 more and I'm the only female and I'm making $20,000 less? Like, it forces organizations to look at their practices, which I think is a great thing.
So let me ask you this question then. First of all, I want to be clear that I do think like it's a net positive, for an organization. Like, if you're an organization that treats your employees well, that you are relatively competitive in the wages that you're paying, and that you are already paying men and women, equally. I don't see this as a big like leap for that organization to make, right? Like, you already had those values. I guess for me, like, where the fundamentally, when we talk about pay transparency. You mentioned earlier in this conversation, it was to, originally it was to have equal pay within men and women, and within an organization, or minorities as well. Like,
Yep.
so essentially to pay everyone who has demonstrated the same amount of commitment, like contribution and skills, and like to pay them equally.
Yeah.
But by advertising these publicly, does that actually solve that issue? Versus, like, could have an organization have set up very, very transparent pay bands within the organization, that it was obvious that men and women and everyone is getting paid at the right, for whatever level of merit that they've achieved equally, without necessarily being this external. I like it because from a job seeker's perspective, my time is valuable. I want to understand whether this is a good fit for me. I don't want to waste, back and forth time. And so that's the only question I have. What is your take on that, in terms of like having to have it being public?
I agree with your point. I see where you're going, but here's the challenge. Here is the big challenge. Can we trust corporations to do the right thing all the time? And it's not a shot at like businesses or corporations, anything like that. But it's proven by looking at the numbers that they're not doing this on the macro level. Sure, there is examples. There's a ton of great companies that are doing it individually and doing a good job. But if you look at the macro of it, no, they're not. And how long is it going to take to be able to get there just organically? So yeah, I get that. I get what you mean. And I hate anytime that the government forces anything. But in this particular case, it's just been proven that organizations are not going to do it unless they're forced. And the proof of that is even companies trying to basically take the good intentions of doing this and or being forced to do it, and they're just screwing with the limits just to see how far can they push it. Like by putting salary range 600, say 60K to 700K, you're laughing at the law, right? You have a valid point, but I always
look out, like the way that my brain works is I'm always looking at alternatives. So in my head, organizations who do pay transparency because they want to and because it's the right thing to do, like, first of all, are going to get a clear advantage because you're basically telling the outside world that, like, hey, we care about treating people equally, and we care about being fair, equitable. If you're doing that because you want to and not because you're forced to, you're already ahead of the curve, because the rest of your company culture is probably going to follow suit. If you're just doing it because you're forced to do it by the government, and if you don't do it, you're going to get whatever is going to happen, which we should talk about for a second here.
If I was a business owner, Yves, I would not want this law. And I want it for a reason that's probably different than what you're thinking. I see this as a possible massive advantage when it comes to recruiting the best talent. If you are out there with your pay transparency and you're only part of 5% of companies that do it,
absolutely,
that's an advantage. That's a huge advantage. So, like, there's LinkedIn data that shows any job that has a pay ban on it has way better results, right? So why not use this as a competitive advantage? That's a good point.
Hey, once in a while. It only took 3 episodes for me to make a good point, but we got there.
Well, exactly. But the ship is sailed. The ship is sailed right now. Like, this is not going back. There's already like 6 provinces. The States is moving. Totally. Europe. Yeah. It's not going to that. It's not going to take a step back. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will. Like,
you know what? I don't think it will go back, but I also don't know that everything is going to change the way people think it's going to change. So, one, how is it going to get reinforced? Like, what is the all of these government bodies that are putting these legislations in place already are understaffed, under resourced, and so think about the Can Spam Act. Do you get less spam in your email today than you did when the Canadian government announced this law where you had to require consent from, and for about a year, every newsletter that you were part of sent you this like, are you getting that now? Are you like, is your inbox, I can tell you mine isn't. So it's like, I get it. I think hopefully, just like the pandemic, which one day I hope that we don't have to keep bringing up the pandemic in these conversations, but just like the pandemic pushed employers to be better with, flexible work environments and hybrid work and those types of things, even if they didn't want to.
Yeah.
I think this will push companies who want to do it. Like this example of this organization, they want to put it in place. And now at some point, management's going to have to agree. I think there'll be good things coming from it. But as far as like, will it change a whole lot? And I'm not so sure.
Well, It depends on the perspective of who's listening. You brought up a little bit of trauma for me because Canadian anti-spam law, Castle. Oh, when was it? Like 2013, 14. It was such a major consideration for anyone in sales or marketing. That's all we talked about because we felt like we're nervous about going to jail. No. We weren't going to jail, but you know what I mean? Well, you could. Like, if you did a lot, you could actually go to jail with this legislation. The amount of spam that I get now, Yves, is insane. So you're right. It has not fixed it. But I want to go back to what you just said as far as enforcement. I actually had a really interesting conversation with a Minister of Labor when they implemented this in a particular province. And I asked exactly that question. How are you going to enforce it? And the answer was, we're not. First of all, we definitely don't have the manpower to be able to go through all the job postings, and God knows how many job boards there is. And is it fair that you're just going to focus, say, on the big ones? Are you going to focus just on, say, Career Beacon in that particular market? They had no plan. They had no plan to enforce it. And the other side of it too, like, do we need more bureaucracy? Do we need to hire more people to be able to manage people putting salary bands on job boards? Yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky situation. And I'm feeling, it was interesting because in Colorado, they actually built up a whole task force that was focused on enforcing this. And it became a little bit ridiculous. Like, small businesses were getting calls and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? What is this legislation? I post a job every 6 years. Yeah. And no, I didn't put a salary. I didn't know I needed to. So we think, because we're in the industry and we talk a lot about it, but Joe's Machine Shop, one of my favorite places.
One day you'll have to take me there. That's always your example of a small business.
Exactly. It's always my example. He doesn't know. He has no clue. Why should I need to put the salary? I pay him, like, I'll see how good his weld is when he comes in, and that will decide how much I pay him. So it's a little bit confusing. Enforcing it, I don't think they're going to be able to long term. Obviously, with AI and the different technology, it might be a lot easier to be able to sift through all of these job boards. But
if Joe knew that, like, the advantages of doing it, and like was versus just being, hey, you need to do this, Joe would probably be willing to put it out there. If he was someone was educating him on like, on the way to do it efficiently within the organization, within his company, within his machine shop. So, the Castle one too. Like, if the only ones really who got fined for those ones were the giant telecom companies, like Rogers and Telus, and those ones that were the ones that were constantly getting like flagged for it, because obviously they were completely in breach from it. But I don't know, the other potential repercussions of some of this is some organization or companies are just not going to advertise jobs in certain areas, especially right now when it's only like some, because no one knows if you're actually going to get flagged and what that's going to look like. So do you want your brand to be like on some government website to be flagged as not meeting those requirements? Like, probably not. Like, I probably don't want to be on the PI website as Career Beacon because I posted a job on their job board and they flagged, and I'm advertised for the wrong reasons. So that's what the public shaming kind of side of it a little bit.
Well, the negative effect to the job seeker here, the example that I shared about Colorado. So companies that were posting jobs remotely for anywhere in the US were avoiding Colorado. So the folks in Colorado did not have the opportunity to apply for any of those jobs because they weren't in the market. And that's the challenge of like the different legislation in either province or in states. If you only have half, or it's really unfair to the other province that have to follow this legislation. So it's kind of either all of it or none in some ways, because it's going to be a competitive disadvantage. I think we're on the same page that it's good to do it. It's good to do it without any legislation.
Agree.
I think it's a good thing to do for an organization. And if you are not ready, you should start getting ready. Put the steps in place. Like, where are the salaries right now? Because I know a lot of business owners that have, say, 30, 40 employees. They really don't remember what they're paying Joe compared to Susie. And so you have to go take a look at that first, because it might not be even an issue.
Is that a different Joe than the Joe's Machine Shop?
No, it's the same Joe. He
just has two jobs.
Well, his machine shop closed down because he wasn't putting the pay bands on it, so he had some issues and couldn't hire anyone. So ended up closing it and then went to work with Susie. Anyway,
yeah. No, I mean, I think. Yes, there definitely went a little bit of a negative tangent on it. I still we do it. Like, we put all the jobs, we've been doing it for the last couple of years. Any jobs that we post, we do put this. We do put salary ranges on it. Internally, we've always really tried to keep everything equitable from a contribution standpoint to the salary wise. So I think on the job seeker side, we should talk a little bit maybe about like how to approach so you see a job posting, you see a salary range. In some cases, it's a fixed salary. In some cases, it's an hourly salary that's being proposed. But in a lot of cases, it'll be salary range. So advice for on the job seeker side, what would you say to a job seeker side who's approaching? Maybe not the Netflix example of a $70,000 to $700,000 salary range or whatever that number was, but like what would be your advice to job seekers going in and has a pay band that goes from 50 to 100,000 for that role, in terms of like where they fit in?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we didn't talk about, but it makes a lot of sense too, is for a recruiter and for the job seeker, we waste a lot of time, right? We waste a lot of time talking to candidates that when you tell them the salary, they're like, oh, I don't want that salary. And so it wastes their time, it wastes the recruiter's time. So that's a valid argument just right there of why you should have pay transparency. But to go to your question, when you're looking at a different range and you're applying for a job, honestly, you have to look for the right opportunity. We all have our bills to be paid, right? Yeah. And if it says 50 to 100, well, in that first conversation with a recruiter, be clear, hey, I need to be on the high end of that range to be even interested in it. Still apply. Like, to me, should not stop you applying even if there's not a salary on the job ad. I still think you should apply, and that's where the first discussion is. You got to be really clear of where you need to be. That's the main advice. There's not a lot of advice. What are you going to do? What's the other option? You don't apply. So either you apply or you don't apply. The way you can get ahead of it, hopefully, is in any conversation. So say a recruiter reaches out to you being like, hey, you applied for this role. You look like a good fit. You could be like, hey, I noticed that the range is 50 to 100. I'm in this range right now. This is where I need to be. If it's not in the level that you're looking at, if you're looking to be at the lower level when you're hiring, or if you're looking at my experience, you're like, you're not at the high level, let's not waste our time. I'll just move on. You move on. We're both happy.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I think I think for me, like if I was a job seeker looking at a position that had like a salary range, like regardless if I think I should be on the upper end of it.
Yeah.
I think one of my first questions would be, what is the difference that you're looking for in an individual who would be at this 50K salary point and 100K salary point? Because that's not always very clear. So that would be what are the expectations of someone that you have in terms of their experience, in terms of their skill sets, in terms of like what they're bringing to the table? So that would probably be my question as a job seeker going in.
That's a really good question. And that might be challenging to answer for a lot of companies. So yeah, you apply to a massive company, they're going to be able to tell you, okay, here are the key competencies that you need to have. For small, medium size, usually owner, operator type of thing that's doing most of the hires, what they'll answer you, and I've been in this situation many times, be like, I just know. I just know. Like, when I talk to them, I'll know if they're worth this or they're worth that. We
Joe,
see that. Yeah, Joe. We see that. Like the machine shop is a really good example because if someone comes in, or say a welding shop in this particular case, they will actually get them to show me your weld. Like show me what you actually can do, similar as say a coding test for a software dev. That could be the difference of demonstrating that skill level. But I hear that all the time. Be like, it's gut feeling. And you're a gut feeling type of hire as well from our last podcast. He'd be like, well, I think I should get paid more because I like the cut of his jib. So that's why I'm going to pay her or him $100K.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the other thing I would say too is if you're looking at a job with a salary range, in most cases, like the actual the max the employers are willing to pay is usually the mid.
Yeah. Do you think so? Do you think
I don't know. I think so. I think a lot of jobs are posted like, oh, I don't want to like if I could land somewhere in the middle, I'd be find someone who's willing to take this median salary on this range. Like I think that's because they add a buffer so that they don't limit too many candidates from the potential quality candidates from the candidate pool. But my guess is like whenever you see a salary range, that they're aiming to get most of the individuals that are going through the door to land somewhere in the middle. I could be wrong. Well,
you'd have more perspective being a business owner than I would, but in my conversation, especially, well, it depends, right? It really depends the type of company. I think large organizations probably care less, to be honest. It's like, if you can get the right skill set, I don't mind paying them. But yeah, I definitely could see that. So we need to give some advice to some people here, right?
I have a final question that does turn into advice. If you're going to, let's see if you provide advice on this one. But
okay,
how do companies who are not in a position to provide, who aren't competitive, because that's one of the organization who really struggle like financially and like they have roles and they're obviously on the lower end of the competitive salary ranges for a lot of those roles. Like, what is the advice for those organizations like who are going to be forced to divulge salaries and and it's going to put them at a clear disadvantage? Like, how can they still attract quality candidates?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because usually my advice will be like, okay, double down on what you're really good at. Double down on your employment brand, making sure people are really clear of, okay, what are the advantages of working here? Some of the disadvantages is, yeah, our salary might be lower, but here are the things that we do better. Here are the things maybe that are a little bit more challenged. So you double down really on the key things that make it exciting to work there. The only clear advice for those that maybe they're just paying lower because they're a smaller business. Maybe they're struggling financially, but they're a really good place to work. Is focus and double down on the key things that make you a different employer. So do you offer more flexibility? Do you have more vacations? Do you have different things that could be really enticing for them? And it could be as simple as, well, maybe your benefits include things like pet insurance, and that particular person is loves dogs and that's what they have. They don't have any kids. This is where really good recruiters come into play, in my opinion, because if you can, similar as you're a salesperson, if you can uncover the key things that person cares about, then you connect that to what the key benefits of that organization, of what it is to work there. It's way harder as a recruiter, but that's why having a really good recruiter makes a difference, because you can get away with it. When I say get away, you can focus on the things that are really good from your organizations and could be a match to that potential.
That's good advice. I'll see if I can get another AI thumbs up here.
Yeah, mine doesn't work for some reason, but here I want to give a little bit of advice on organizations and how they should approach it when it comes to pay transparency. Small organizations, I think, going into the market without knowing what actually people are getting paid in that role could be disastrous for you. So yeah, maybe you have paid $40,000 a year for that role for the past 10 years and you haven't gone to the market to hire someone new. So you just go in with exactly the same range that you've had before. You could be like, without knowing it, you could be way below and you're not getting the level of candidates that you're looking for. So make sure you know what actually that role is being paid. And there's a ton of resources that are not that expensive. And like just doing a simple search on Career Beacon to look at, okay, I'm hiring for this role. This is what other employers are paying is the first step that I would take. The other thing is like start planning what those roles are going to be ahead, way ahead, then looking back into, okay, these are the types of roles we have. This is what we're paying. And if you know that you're going to have difficult conversations because you're paying someone, say it's 60K, and you want to level up the next person that you hire at a higher level, right? Like that employee might be great, but they're just not at the level of that career or have the skills yet to be paid at the next level. And the next person you want to hire, have those conversations with those employees as quick as possible, being like, hey, we are hiring. This is the skill set we're looking for. We love you as an employee. And this is the path that you're going to have if you want to get to the same salary. But here are the skill sets we're looking for, would be the advice. Do you want to add anything to that, Yves? Do you have any other advice for businesses?
There's educate yourself, as you mentioned. I think that's the biggest part is like you said, there's a ton of tools, like whether it's just searching job boards for existing jobs, there's I think it's PayScale, and there's a few other tools. If people can reach out to us too if they want some advice on tools they can use, or we can even provide the data. Start with that, and then start with understanding where everyone in your organization is at, right? Like start mapping out, and not only mapping out the role that it is today, but like what you almost have to plan the career trajectory a little bit. So what is the next, where do they go? Like if you're promoting them into the next role, to the next role, where does that lead them? You can't just have individual roles. Like we are as an organization, everyone has job titles, but we don't have really a hierarchy or anything like really mapped out, right? Like we're a small team, but as a larger organization, you can't go from marketing coordinator and just not have the plan for what next steps that person's going to go, or from a customer support to, they could go into sales, they could go into other roles within your organization. And so mapping out the internal career path for your employees, I think would be a worthwhile investment. But there's a ton of resources out there for small businesses, right?
There is.
And shameless plug, but we either have an ebook that's already out by the time that this podcast is going to be live, or will be out soon. Who knows? But I believe that has some really good insights as a starting point for all of our listeners.
So for anyone listening, the ebook will be available in the show notes. So there's a direct link in the show notes that you'll be able to find. You can go to careerbeacon.com and find it there. All our socials, you can find it there as well. So yeah, I think there is a lot of resources that when it comes to pay transparency, I don't think the ship will be turning. I think it's full steam ahead. And as an organization, you don't want to be left behind. So get ahead of it if you can. For some province, it's already too late. If you're not on top of it, there's still time, right? Like I'm not seeing or hearing anyone getting enforced for not doing it. But there's a potential it might come, but you are at a disadvantage because if someone's looking at a similar job, one has a pay range, when the other one doesn't, you're at a disadvantage. So on that note, Yves, this is our second episode of Beacon Bits, and I've been trying to find a tagline, right? And I was like, let's chew the beacon, or how about some crispy career advice, or
I don't think we need a tagline for now, based on those ones. You were never in marketing, I suspect.
It depends. I come up with taglines all the time, right? They're always pretty good.
I mean, just to be clear, like Beacon Bits wasn't really the one. We were throwing some names around, and in a client meeting this week had such a great reaction to it that we just couldn't go with it. So thank you to client that we met with this week because it made our decision a little bit easier. But yeah, it's fun. It's our personality. I think we want to talk about serious topics, but it's going to be a pretty informal approach to it. So as far as tagline goes, let's just maybe hold off for another episode or two. But yeah.
I can come up with a bunch of them. So I'll be sending you more taglines.
Someone's going to sign off on any of those, by the way.
Beacon and eggs. All right. That's enough. Yves, another fun episode of Beacon Bits. For the audience, thank you so much for listening. And please do get a hold of us. So careerbeacon.com. I'm Serge Boudreau. You can find me on LinkedIn. Also, you can find my uglier brother, Yves. Kidding. We're not brothers. Yves Boudreau on LinkedIn as well, or just reach out to
much younger Boudreau on LinkedIn.